I'm not listening to you. I'm seeing you well, but I cannot listen to you.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. How do I present myself in Maui?
I know, I saw that. That's so funny. Hey, you're in Hawaii too. We're actually having a really big windstorm here
Okay.
today. So I'm going to use this microphone because it's just picking up too much sound. I mean, we're having almost, you know, 50 to 70 mile an hour winds.
Sure.
Um, and so trees are breaking and winds are, and so anyways, can you hear me okay without the wind sound? Because my other microphones were picking up
No, no,
way too
no.
much sound.
Can hear you perfectly, perfectly. And look,
Okay,
I was
great.
very worried at a certain point because there was a lot of fires there. What happened exactly? There was a lot of fires.
Um, well, are we on now, or we're recording? The show is going, or is this intro, or what's going on?
That's it. We are you. The urbanoids are talking.
Okay, okay. Wow. Well, yeah, there was a great big fire here. Uh, According to statistics, the largest fire in the United States in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
So that's pretty severe. And an entire town was decimated and removed from the
Oh,
surface of this island, the town of Lahaina on
ah,
Maui. Approximately 22 to 25,000 residents um, live in that area, and somewhere between 15 and 20,000 of them lost their homes.
yeah, yeah.
So it was pretty severe and pretty big. And we had a similar kind of what we have right now, a windstorm happening, where a hurricane was passing by, and that hurricane was quite a distance from us. I mean, it was like 500 miles from us. However, a whole series of events caused some severe weather to happen here, and then that severe weather caused severe winds, and those winds picked up some really kind of tiny fires and made them really big and spread them very quickly.
Yeah.
And there's all different types of explanations that people are sharing, whether or not it was energy weapons or this or that. And, it's like there's a lot of conspiracy all around it. Um, for myself, uh, been on the ground, doing what I can to try and help, um, creating video footage of the positive nature of humanity showing up and supporting each other.
Mhm.
Um, I'm less dedicated to digesting the conspiracies as I am how do we move forward? How do we take care of the people that are displaced? How
Of
do we
course.
feed those people? How do we house those people? How do we clothe those people? I've met several people who literally got out and, with what they had in their pockets,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was it. And the rest of their lives are gone. It looks like a nuclear bomb went off. I mean, it's gone.
Sure.
It's I mean, water, water heaters, television, stoves, I mean, melted, just, intense fire. And now it's a very toxic area with all of the different plastics and different chemicals and paints and all the stuff that got incinerated
Yeah.
turned into kind of a toxic soup of powder now that that they've coated with what's supposed to be a ecological substance that is supposed to hold all those chemicals in place, kind of congeal all the dust over this entire city so that it doesn't run into the ocean and kill all the reefs and kill all the wildlife.
Yeah.
And so it's a big deal, and it's a 5 to 10 year kind of process of rebuilding, restabilizing. I mean, all of that
Cleaning.
soil, all of that dirt, all that stuff has to be removed. You can't live there. And so we're talking about excavating an entire town. And we're out in the middle of the ocean. So that's got to be put onto something and taken somewhere. I don't know who's going to take our poison and what's going to happen. That's not really being discussed. I mean, people are trying to discuss it, but there's no one providing any answers concerning that, you know? So
Right.
it's an extraordinary set of circumstances. And then on top of that, you know, right after that, then all of a sudden, you know, the wars begin to break out and those types of bombings. And so there's, you know, as most of the world, things are pretty unsettled here on the island of Maui. And then on top of that, we have all the kind of world catastrophes that are going on. So it's extraordinary times, you know, absolutely extraordinary times um, to be alive and to be testing all the spiritual and psychological and new age theories as far as how you remain in your center, how you remain at peace, how do you remain, you know, in a spiritual context inside of all of this. And so that's what I'm mostly focused on for myself.
I can imagine, Joe. Just to refresh your mind, I met you 10 years ago in a movement in Maui against the GMO. Do you remember that?
Yeah. um, yeah, that was a pretty big that was a pretty big movement. Uh, uh, I mean, I wasn't against GMOs.
No,
I was
you
for the
were
protection of the land.
exactly,
I
exactly,
was for the protection of the land and for the protection of the children.
exactly.
Um, there's a new way for us to begin to work for things to change. And instead of being against something, we are for something.
Mm.
There's like three principles now: to be for something, not against something, to always keep it in the question, always keep it in an inquiry, and to remember that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm.
Okay. And so how this happens now is that this company that I mean Maui used to be the largest open air biological and chemical test site in the world, the largest open air chemical laboratory in the world, right here in these beautiful islands. And 80% of the seeds that are given to farmers to grow GMO corn were made here. This was the GMO seed factory. And so, you know, they were using 80 chemicals that weren't allowed anywhere else on the planet. Okay. I mean, no other country would allow these chemicals in their borders, let alone being sprayed in the open. And that's what was happening here. And so instead of us saying they're using 80 chemicals and they're poisoning us, I would say, well, okay, if they're using 80 chemicals that no one else is using, and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States, says that they're not monitoring what happens there. Should we maybe have a look? Should we maybe concern ourselves? You see, this is how we keep it in the question. Instead of making accusations against it, being against something, it's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
coming to it almost very, very Gandhi-ish, if you
Mhm.
will. You know, where Gandhi, you know, he said, you know, this is never going to sustain itself. The British are going to leave at some point, you know, and when they leave, they'll leave as friends. But this is on its way out. And so, in the same way, we came to this very serious situation with love in our hearts, aloha in our hearts, yet very clearly, you know, stating the truth and asking some very good questions. And those questions led to the whole operation ultimately being shut down. And we wrote a law, and the citizens voted on that law, and we won. And then they took it to court and they played their little games, but eventually they disappeared.
Fantastic.
And so we've saved the islands in that regard.
Fantastic.
Um, and
Congratulations.
it was the Thank you. But yes, that's when we met. That was a long time ago. And do I remember? Yeah, I led the whole thing. So yeah, I remember. Um, I'm very careful about how I speak about it in interviews and things of that nature because there were some serious backlashes as a result of uh, me being successful.
Mm.
And essentially, I was erased from the internet for almost 10 years.
Fantastic.
And for 9 years, my website was gone, my YouTube channel was gone, everything was just erased. I was erased.
Yeah.
And so now, I'm teaching and I'm doing less activism and more kind of like what is the place from which, where is the place from which we operate in order to affect change positively. But mostly it's about our connection to really what it means to be a human being on the planet. What does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
And for myself, when I look into the world, I feel like most of us have been raised in a reality whereby all that is natural has become unnatural, and what is unnatural is what we consider natural. Like being in the city is natural for us. Well, that's as unnatural as it gets. I mean, everything there went through a human mind. There's nothing about. So as a result, I feel like we've lost a real connection to our animal nature, our truest nature. We superimpose all these structures on our reality that we try and live into, and all of it is a fabricated reality of what it is we think should be, as opposed to how do we relate to what actually is.
Well, thank you. In the meanwhile, you've been writing, no? You've been writing, and you've been giving some talks or so. Can you tell us about a little bit more about that work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ricardo. Well, it's a big question, but for myself, for the better part of 40 years, I've been on the cutting edge of research for human psychology and human spirituality. And my clients, so I've done counseling and coaching, and my clients in coaching have been people like Wayne Dyer, people like Ram Dass, people like Jack Canfield. When these kind of thought leaders needed someone to talk to kind of put some framework into their reality, I was the go-to guy. Um, so I have been creating, I have a best-selling book called Repeatlessness, an owner's manual for the human mind. And there were at one point over 20 million people following my work worldwide. Um, and there's a lot of what I call new age hoopla that's been added to the science. And there's a lot of, quite frankly, bullshit out there, that people are buying and people are trying and using, spending lots of money, and it's not doing anything. It lasts for a little bit while, and then it just kind of fizzles out. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why these systems, and they're almost sometimes designed to have that type of effect, so that you got to go buy the next book and go buy the next book and buy the next book and next book, and you get kind of attached to these systems. Anyway, so for 40 years, I've been researching the development of one's personality and mapping what is the sequence of events that takes place that creates who you are, right? All human beings come in kind of a clean slate, they were born, and then we begin to be conditioned. And what my friend Ram Dass used to call somebody training begins, right? And we become a somebody. And unfortunately, that conditioning and that somebodyness um, uh, is not necessarily based on who it is we actually are. See, the stuff I teach has to do with getting someone back to what I call their pre-identity. Okay. And their pre-identity state is a state of how you come into the world. Okay. You come into the world in this, you don't have an identity. And for the first year and a half of your life, so for first 18 months of one's life, all human beings, somewhere between 16 and 20 months, we live a life that has no separation consciousness. And that separation consciousness, me and you and you and me, and this ability to distance ourselves and now have a subjective reality, is there's a brain part that's responsible for that separation consciousness, and that's called the hippocampus. Okay. And when the hippocampus turns on, all of a sudden the I and the me and you and the it, and all of that starts to turn on. And everything that that I says about itself, I like broccoli, or I'm fussy when I go to bed, or all of the identity is what it heard said about it in its environment from its significant role models for that first 18 months of our lives. Mm. And so we become what people have described us as opposed to being able to be who it is we are here to be. And so my work, that's what we do. We work on getting you back to your pre-identity so that you can be who it is you are here to be and not be doomed to who it is you were told you were. Mm. So 40 years of research into that, 40 years into the sequence of events that takes place in our brains to create our eyes, and then the things that the memes, the unquestioned beliefs that control that and sustain it and perpetuate it. How do we reverse engineer that? How do we unpack that? How do we work with that? So I spent a year creating a 7-week program called the New Normal Challenge. It's a 7-week New Normal Challenge. And in that, you begin to unwind and unpack all of these kind of structures, as well as learn all the biophysical things that you can do, different types of breathing techniques, different types of visualization, different types of thought processes that you can begin to employ, and techniques that you can begin to employ that will generate an unshakable, unwavering, centered self, so that no matter what's happening in your external world, you maintain that center. And so it's kind of my gift to the world. I mean, it's my parting gift. I mean, I don't know that I don't know that I have much more to give. It is everything I've ever learned in 40 years, reduced to the best of the best of the best into a 7-week program that you begin to integrate into your life, and then it will be with you for the rest of your life. And it's tools that you will employ, that you will integrate into the fabric of how it is you relate to this reality, so that you have a filtering system to not be dragged out of your truest self. So that's what I've been writing. That's what I've been creating. It's a video course that you take online. It's an app that you can download onto your phone. It's a whole thing. And then there's 2 ways that you take that course. You can just take it solo, just by yourself at your own pace, and that's one price. And then you can take it where you have access to me every day. So that as you're going through it, if you have questions and you want consulting, and then if you do the everything Joe package, if you will, you have access to every class I've ever taught. And it's about $20,000 worth of material that you get in just one fell swoop, one price for the rest of your life. You have that material available. So it's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal. And there's just so much garbage out there. And you just listen to the testimonials. If you go, I think my name is showing up, the newnormalcenter.com in the corner there. If you're showing the newnormalcenter.com. And if people go there, they can begin to watch the unsolicited, testimonials about people's lives being transformed. That I'm not about replacing what you've learned. And we've all had those moments, those periods in our lives where we've excelled, and we were on fire, and like we just really got it, and we were clear and we were centered, and then we got dragged off from that. Well, what we do is we get you back to what works for you, and then accelerate that with a series of other techniques that you can add to that. So I don't tell you how to think, I just tell you how thinking works, so that then you can employ tools so that you can maintain control of that process.
It's kind of a waking up of the genetic memory that you bring out with you.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to quote you on that. That's
now.
Okay, you get it for free now. You just gave me my slogan. No, but essentially, it's true. I mean, each every single human being is a piece of the puzzle. That what I say, from the beginning of time, right? Whether it was the Big Bang that started all of this, right? Or some, God waving his magic wand, starting it all, whatever it was, there was a beginning. And from that beginning to right now, and from right now for the rest of eternity, there will never be another you, right? You're it. Every single human being is unique. Every single human being has a piece of the puzzle. Everybody has something significant to offer this gestalt of experience of all of us being together in the soup.
Mm.
And so, how do you bring that forth?
Mm.
What is the way? What are the systems that are available? So I spent 40 years and over $1 million studying every single self-help group, every religion, every practice, everything that's out there that is supposed to empower you, and found out what they all had in common, found out the most effective tools that were effective for me, and then provide that smorgasbord of techniques in a sequence of events that gives you that opportunity to fully turn on your you-ness and give you that place from which you can operate where you are no longer influenced by what other people say and think. Period.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for you.
It's a pretty good deal, you know.
It is. I have a question for you that is, in all these people that are passing a little bit by your life and all this research that you do also in our character, how do you see as human beings our capacity? Is it a common capacity to cultivate in the human being? Cultivate in terms of the need to cultivate, the need to collect, the need to cultivate your own environment, the need to cultivate food, the need to cultivate, the need to gardening. Is it gardening the essential thing of human beings? What do you think?
that's such a beautiful question. I mean, it's such a beautiful question, and it's a really multifaceted answer. I don't know that there's one thing that says it all into that. Um, it depends on what culture you're from, okay? Because like if you study the Hopi Indian, right, the Hopi Nation of Native American Indian, as far as we know anthropologically, okay, the Hopi Nation was a non-warring nation, so they were never at war with anybody, and and that's a completely different kind of culture that sustains that, and that sustenance was in their languaging. Okay, so in the Hopi language of that tribe, they don't have a word. They don't have a word for us. They don't have a word meaning us because they have no word for them. Right? There's just life. There's just life. They don't have a word for now because they don't have a word for then. Okay. And so when you're sitting in a place of ever evolving, ever emoting, ever changing, ever growing, ever presenting life to you, and so the idea of possessions, the idea of owning something, the reason they would have something was if they were given something, whether it was a fur or some food, it was because they were supposed to be the purveyor, the gifter, if you will, of those things to someone who didn't have it. That's why possessions were given in their kind of reality, in their spirituality. If you were given a possession and you had no use for it, it was for you to pass it on to someone who needed it. Now, that culture has a whole nother way of interacting with this gardening or this collection of kind of things, of this identity, of possession and what possessions were and what they meant. Unfortunately, I believe, unfortunately, what has happened to human consciousness is that our possessions have become our identity, right? That what we possess shows our prowess, shows our success, shows our status in society, and shows all this kind of stuff. And now we can trace back to the early 1900s. Edwin Bernays, I think was his name, was Sigmund Freud's nephew, I believe it was. And see, during the late 1800s, early 1900s, the industrial revolution that was happening here in the United States was beginning to spread throughout the world, and we made the best products in the world. Everything we made was the best of the best. Our ovens were the best. Our skillets were the best. Every tool we made was the best of the best. You could not make better. It was the cutting edge of the time. But the manufacturers at that time realized that, eventually we're going to saturate the market. And, the things that we're making can last 200 years, right? I mean, we're making things that are going to last forever. So eventually we're not going to have any customers because we're going to, and so they hired this psychologist to begin to kind of create, if you will, the concept of the consumer and the need to have the greatest and the best, the need to keep up with your neighbors. Oh, look, the Joneses just got the newest, greatest stove, and look what theirs does. And now they're living so easy and so da 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 da. And they made it. They actually turned this idea of capitalism and this idea of consumerism into a competition in society, which didn't exist. So this is, this is a couple hundred years old,
Yep.
And not even, I mean, just 100 some years old, this whole, but it has pervaded, and now with the advent of social media and what have you, young children are asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, and they'll say, I want to be an influencer. Oh, okay. Well, what do you want to influence by? What do you mean? And not that there should be any content to their influencing. They just want the status of being an influencer. Not that they're a purveyor of truth, a purveyor of well eating or how to garden or anything of any significance. They just want to be popular. Okay, so in answer to your question, is it in our nature to kind of collect? Is it in our nature to identity? I don't think so. I don't think it's actually in our nature. I think it's been in our conditioning. And I believe that, Plato wrote about it thousands of years ago in his book called The Republic. And Plato was talking about how do you control masses of people. And we've always heard this kind of divide and rule. We've heard that, create a division in that society. And in that division, then you come in as the third authority and keep the peace inside that division, right? And so this device has been used for quite a while by portions of ourself, if you will, because I see it just as a singularity in different forms, or just one life form here in many different varieties. But the portion of ourself that seems to be kind of pulling some strings, if you will, have been successfully dividing the masses and pitting us against each other for hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years, and successfully doing so to be able to maintain some sense of control over this mass. And so I don't believe it's in our nature. I don't believe it's in our wiring. I believe our wiring and our nature have been conditioned to respond to this life in that way. And as a result, we see this destruction of everything that's beautiful and everything that's wonderful. Now, I write about it in one essay. I have a peer-reviewed essay that I wrote. I was in a documentary years ago called The Frequency of Genius, where a bunch of us who were considered kind of thought leaders were put into a 4.5-hour documentary talking about what we understand about human consciousness and the current situation we find ourselves in. It was a very successful documentary, millions of copies sold worldwide. It was distributed all over the place. And then the producers of that wanted to create a book called Frequency of Genius, Solutions for the 21st Century. And they went to 12 of us now. There was only 5 of us in that documentary. Maybe 6. I can't remember right now. It's a long time ago. And so 12 of us were approached, and they said they want us each to write a chapter in a book. And in that chapter, they wanted us to describe from our particular vantage point, what is the quintessential understanding humans have to have in order for our species to survive? So what's the one thing we need to understand in order for our species not to destroy itself? And so each one of us were to write that our chapter. And so I wrote a chapter about that, and it's called the oh, come on, the state of our union, the state of our union. So the state of our oneness, essentially. And I point to the development of a particular brain part, and that this brain part was, at one point, humans, we were in the food chain, right? We were food. Yeah. Right?
Part of the others.
Right, exactly. And we were food. And that was, the major cause of death. In fact, that was like the cause of death in like 99% of cases that we could tell anthropologically, was that we were eaten. And bones that we find, you can see the chew marks in the bones, kind of thing. And anyways, but then when we went from kind of Cro-Magnon man to Homo sapien, where we are today, we developed a new brain part. And the brain part is called the prefrontal lobe. And what the prefrontal lobe gave us was the ability to simulate the future, to simulate and predict what it believes the future is going to be. Because before, like Grog was sitting there, and Grog would just get eaten by a tiger. Tiger come along and eat him, right? But now all of a sudden Grog can think. Grog no won't be food no more, right? Grog see tiger, Grog run, right? This was new. And so biologically, the brain part that was required in order for our species to survive, so without that brain part, our species may not have survived. So that evolutionary step that took place allowed us to exist as we are today. However, that brain part didn't stop growing. And it grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and began to kind of take over our perceptual reality. And in so doing, now this brain part is so big and so pervasive that in this essay that I write, I discuss how it has that everything you see today, everything that you can't stand, everything that is the destruction of everything that is absolutely magnificent in this reality, everything that is horrible about this life is a result of this prefrontal lobe run amok and out of control. And that it has literally taken over our entire perceptual reality. And so, and then what do we do about that? How do we deal with that? And what have you? Well, and so that's called the state of our union.
Yeah, for sure. During that process, it's the process also that we develop agriculture. No, what is it? That the part, that the capacity to predict and to anticipate and to wait for the seed to become a plant. And
it was several thousand years after that the Neolithic stage began. And so, yes, exactly, we could begin to recognize patterns, and in recognizing those patterns, begin to, hey, I threw this food out, and look, it started to grow there. Ah, what? Hey, those little things, look what they do. they make food, and yeah, and then we stopped being nomads as a result. And then we found the areas that grew better and grew, and were abundant and what have you. And so, yes, absolutely. So the very brain part, though, that was necessary for that, I mean, it's a lot to discuss. I mean, I wrote an entire, it's probably about a 3 or 4 hour read, and it's an intense read to really kind of take in all of the significance of this particular brain part. However, it is the brain part that causes us to question whether or not we trust someone. And I'm not saying that that the brain part is bad. It keeps us from burning ourselves on the stove and keeps us from walking in front of cars in the street and what have you. But when it has taken over our entire reality and has taken over our entire perceptual reality, and we're not aware that that's what it's doing, right? Then it might be time to kind of check it. And it might be time to begin to question how much of our perceived reality is on an automatic protection system that has kind of been guided and controlled. You see, that's the other thing. Part of this thing that we previously talked about, this idea of that collecting things in our identity and what have you, is wrapped up in this prefrontal lobe. And see, the prefrontal lobe's job is to protect you from harm. Okay? That's what its job is to do. It's to protect you from getting hurt. All right? Now, as a child, you're growing up and you're this clean slate and you're being conditioned. No, don't do that. No, don't do this. And your whole life is being conditioned. And so this prefrontal lobe begins to act in such a way that it is constantly looking for the pain from your past. Okay, so you have this list of things that happened in your past, and use that list, and it looks into the future for anything that resembles anything. So it's constantly looking, constantly scanning for things that resemble that past experience. Now, in conjunction with that, you have then the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system is the part of the brain whose job it is to find evidence of your beliefs. Okay, so something happens to you as a child, and you believe now that if I act this way, dad is going to get mad. Okay. I act this way, dad is going to get mad. So then it develops a personality or a strategy to never act that way again because it doesn't want to upset dad. And that way, then I can avoid dad yelling at me. Well, dad yells at you anyways, just because he's got whatever is going on in his life. So now you try a new personality, and we start putting on all these personalities and all these things, trying to avoid pain, and our entire life becomes a pain avoidance mechanism, essentially. So how do we get out of that? How do we get out of that? And there's not a human being that I've met, and I've been doing this for 40 years and worked with hundreds of thousands of people, 20 million people following the work. I've never met anyone who's escaped that truth. And so if we face it and we begin to work on ourselves, we have an opportunity to be free of it. If we don't, we'll die with it. And it sounds kind of harsh and kind of, but I'm just so tired of just trying to be sweet about it.
Yeah. We are traumatized as a society, as you say, like this mechanism, this organism, this extension that we produced to make us to go to another dimension have created the trauma in us.
Society, all of society on the planet, we are living in post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD. I talk about it in my Mechanics of Mind Control videos. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's like probably 20 or 30 hours of free lectures you can get online if you go to YouTube. Repeatlessness at YouTube, Repeatlessness, repeatlessness on YouTube. You can watch all these lectures. The Mechanics of Mind Control are like the basis for a lot of this stuff. And in that, I discuss this research about our brains that what we have found is that every day, all day, we have a dialogue that's going on in our head. And this conversation's going on. Someone might say, what's he talking about? That, but just said that. That's what I'm talking about. This voice that's in your head is constantly talking. Now, at the beginning of the lecture, I tell people, if you think that voice in your head is who you are, then you are under mind control. It might be your own mind that's controlling you, but that comes with the package, your body. It's not who you are. Right? Who you are is listening to that voice, but it's not the voice. And it's very interesting when we begin to make that distinction, because then what we learn is that this thing is talking every day, and we can measure that there's approximately 50,000 thought forms every day. Every single day, you got 50,000 of these impulses going on in your brain and this conversation going on in your head. Now, of those 50,000, we're able to measure that 80% of them are negative or limiting in some way. Our instructions stopping you, telling you no, 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 if you will. But 80%, so that's 40,000. So you got 50,000 that happen all day. 40,000 of them are negative or limiting in some way. This is research. This is some idea. So then, what even blows our mind even further, this is the premise of my entire book. So this is in the first chapter, which you can go, if you go to my website, which you've been to my website, repeatlessness.com, there's a little button that says start your journey. You don't have to send an email or anything. You just start. You can listen